Alright, so this is a little bit of a different one from usual. I'm in my garden because it's almost the summer holidays, so I thought I'd get out and about rather than sit in my office. And I'm here today to talk to you about what I think about what's happening in the qualitative AI space. So why am I doing that? A while back I posted on LinkedIn asking who'd be interested in what I think about AI in qualitative research and why. And so a bunch of people said they would. So here goes. There's 6 sections. You can read it on my blog if you don't want to watch or listen. And actually I could write a post the length of this one on each topic. But instead I've prioritised some of the headlines, I guess you'd call them, as I currently see them, under a bunch of headings. So first of all, a little bit of background from whence my thoughts derive. And then I'll talk a little bit about what I think of the development of AI tools for Qual. Then what I think about the capabilities of AI tools for Qual. Then what I think about the implications of AI on Qual. And then I'll finish up by talking a little bit about how I will and will not use generative AI and the evolving relationship between methods and tools. It's quite long, so you might need to grab a coffee. And if you don't want to watch or listen, then as I said, head on over to the blog post and you can read it instead. Oh, the last thing I should say before I get going is that I have written this entirely myself. So although I'm not against the use of generative AI for certain writing tasks, and if you want to know more about that, then there's another post on LinkedIn, a response I wrote to a piece actually about university professors now refusing to mark students' writing. That has been in any way facilitated by generative AI. I don't think that's the right approach. But anyway, I did write this, and why? Because I like writing. So I'm not doing anything other than still writing myself, even though it took me many hours over several weeks to pull this together. So I hope you think it was worth my time doing that, and that it's worth yours listening, reading or watching. So let's get going. Background from whence my thoughts derive. So I'm personally fascinated by and professionally engaged in the rise and implications of generative AI for qualitative research, and particularly in how various communities are responding to what's going on in this space. My thinking on these matters is continually evolving, but my main interest and the context from which this piece is written is in the relationship between qualitative methods and tools. And so any of you watching this today, if you know any of my work, you'll know that I'm an advocate of methods driving the use of tools, or in the language of the 5-level QDA method, which is the CAQDAS pedagogy that I developed with Nick Wolf. What we say is that strategies drive tactics, and what that means is that qualitative researchers use tools, whether they're manual tools, digital tools or AI, to enact methods in the service of accomplishing research objectives rather than the other way round, so not finding a way to use tools just because they're there. And so yes, I do know that tools can inform methods, and that's okay, I don't have a problem with that, but I don't think that tools should drive methods. The distinction between informing and driving is a subtle one, but a really important one. But that's not what I'm here to talk about today. I'm here to talk about AI and Qual. So let's put that in a little bit of context in terms of my professional positionality, if you like. So awareness raising and capacity building at the CAQDAS networking project. So my role there involves developing a broad and deep understanding of what's going on in the computer-assisted qualitative data analysis space. And I do that so that the project can continue to do what it's been doing for the last, since 1994, however many years that is now, which is to raise awareness and build capacity in methodologically appropriate use of tools for qualitative analysis. And that requires a balanced approach that takes account of the range of tools and their capabilities, as well as the diverse perspectives around their development and use. And so my approach remains, as it has always been, pragmatic and pluralistic. If you want to know more about this approach, then look out for a forthcoming chapter that I've written. It's currently under review, but I'll put in the episode notes info about that. Basically, it's a chapter about rethinking qualitative pedagogy and practice in the context of generative AI. Sometimes I'm challenged for taking this kind of balanced, independent approach. For example, I'm frequently asked which the best tool is, and I'm encouraged to share my favourites, but honestly, I don't believe there is a best tool. I really don't. Just like I don't believe there's a best method or methodology. If you want to know more about that, then there's a post that you can read on my blog where I rant about the image about the Qual quant paradigm wars that was doing the rounds a couple of years ago. Instead, I believe that there are only appropriate methods for the research questions at hand, and that we need to enact those through the most appropriate use of tools. And what constitutes the most appropriate use of tools is something I can certainly facilitate researchers to think about, and I spend a lot of my time doing that. But at the end of the day, it's the responsibility of each researcher or group of researchers doing each individual project to decide and justify what methods and tools are appropriate. I would never deem to suggest that I'm the font of all such knowledge. No one is. I know a lot about qualitative methods and tools, but you are always the expert in your project, and therefore you need to make those informed choices and be able to justify them. All right, so back to the topic at hand, AI in the Qual space. And the next section of my post is entitled My Inverted Hype Cycle, From Skepticism to Pragmatism. So pretty immediately after OpenAI released ChatGPT in November 2022, there was loads and loads of hype about what the capabilities of large language models meant for qualitative research. My initial reaction was a mix of skepticism, concern and intrigue. So skepticism about whether these tools could actually do what it was being claimed they could. Concern about what these technologies would mean for the field of qualitative research, and intrigue about how researchers would react to the capabilities and also how developers would adopt them or not. It was clear that I not only needed to get to grips with what was happening and how it might impact the field, but that it was my responsibility to do so, and I take that responsibility very seriously. However, it would be dishonest to say that I was initially excited. I wasn't. As such, I didn't follow the typical hype cycle proposed by Gartner. Rather than starting out with a peak of inflated expectations after the technology trigger, followed by the trough of disillusionment before over time going through a slope of enlightenment and then reaching a plateau of productivity, my experience began, I guess you would say, with a trough of disillusionment, which was followed by a sort of inverted slope of enlightenment on the way to a plateau of productivity that I guess, if truth be told, I'm yet to reach. There has been no peak of inflated expectations for me in this space. So I guess what I'm saying is that pragmatism prevailed. It was obvious very quickly to me that qualitative researchers were using these tools. Whether me, you, or anyone else likes it or not, this is a reality. And we therefore must discuss it, every angle of it, and also in a respectful and open way. And I don't think that that's always happening. So let's play nicely, please. A lot of people have got their heads in the sand about what's happening, or are up in arms about it, criticising students and fellow researchers who are experimenting with and or using generative AI tools for aspects of their process. I don't think that's helpful. Ignoring what's happening or demonising those who are using generative AI is, in my belief, actually harmful. That's not to say I advocate wholesale use of generative AI for qualitative research for its own sake. I don't. There's a lot of rubbish being produced out there right now in the name of qualitative research, and many inappropriate and unethical uses of these technologies. And that is equally dangerous. My point, though, is that the community, in all its diversity, must come together to debate the issues in open, collegiate and meaningful ways. We should call out the charlatans, absolutely, but to demonise those who are using generative AI without being open to understanding what they're doing, why they're doing it and how, belies a form of dogmatism that, frankly, disappoints me. I've actually been pretty impressed with the openness of those attending my sessions, who do not all attend as advocates, as you might expect. Typically there's a range of gut feelings amongst groups, and I capture at the beginning of every session by asking them what their feelings are. Some of you will have seen some examples that I've occasionally posted on LinkedIn, and I can share with you the results of circa 550 participants or so who've attended various of my sessions in the last few months. These are researchers attending sessions about the use of generative AI for qualitative research. It's a testament to the practitioners in the field that those who are sceptical do come to find out about what's going on in the space. And I think we should applaud that. Alright, so let's get a bit more practical. My qualitative AI experiences. And I guess what I've been doing is adopting a sort of participant observer role in this space over the last 2.5 years or so. How did I get to this position? So since early 2023, I've designed and delivered dozens and dozens of awareness-raising, training and capacity-building sessions of various formats and lengths on topics related to AI-assisted qualitative research. Not just via the CAQDAS networking project, but also in open workshops for other providers, including the Social Research Association, Research Accelerator based in New Zealand, and Instats, as well as my own company QDAS. And also for numerous bespoke clients and conferences. I am in the process of collating a list, but that's not yet happened. Anyway, these experiences have allowed me to engage with several thousand researchers and students around the world working on qualitative projects in a variety of different contexts, while sharing information about tools and fostering critical thinking about their impact on methods. I've learnt loads about the evolving state of the debate concerning generative AI in qualitative research spaces. I've spoken to and taught students and emerging researchers, established researchers and academics, government researchers and policymakers, industry and commercial analysts, and qualitative practitioners. To be able to design and deliver these sessions, I've of course had to learn about large language models, generative AI, and the tools that harness these capabilities for qualitative research applications. And that involves, obviously, continually experimenting with the tools as they evolve. And I do that so that I can think about and discuss how they may or may not be useful in different types of qualitative research. So yes, I'm using them, but primarily for that purpose. Actually, that's nothing new for me. I've been doing this since 1998, when I first began working with the CAQDAS networking project. What's different now is the scope and pace of development and the nature of the debate in different communities of practice and on social media. Way more tools are out there that I need to get a handle on, and the speed of development is staggering in comparison to what we've seen over the past 40 odd years since the CAQDAS field emerged. And that really blows my mind, to be honest. And it's sometimes overwhelming and exhausting, but also something that I thoroughly enjoy because I love playing with tools. I love talking with developers and methodologists, colleagues and friends, and I love thinking about the implications. That's what I do. I'm continually grateful, actually, for how open most CAQDAS developers are with me about what they're doing in the space, and that really informs my thinking. So that's why I see myself essentially as being a participant observer in this space. It's been a privilege to work with so many researchers around the world who have shared their experiences and thoughts really openly with me and asked questions that have really got me thinking in different ways. One of the things I love most about what I do. So what do I think about the development of AI tools for Qual? So although my focus and specialism is in the use of tools for qualitative data analysis, whether AI or otherwise, I don't believe that this conversation can be had outside of a broader discussion about the development of AI more generally. So that's where I'm going to start, and here are a few of my headlines on this topic as I'm currently thinking about them. So first of all, knowing what we're talking about. What even is AI? So discussion about AI for qualitative research and decisions about whether to use tools can only be had in the context of understanding what AI is, how it works, and what the implications of its development and use are. So if you come to any of my courses, that's what you're going to hear about at the beginning. There are multiple definitions of AI, including those stemming from technical, marketing, and critical perspectives. And these are, in my experience, not well understood in qualitative communities, these diverse perspectives and definitions. But my question is, how can we engage meaningfully with what's happening without exploring these definitions, where they come from, who advocates for them, and how they shape our thinking? Some of the more influential authors on my thinking in this regard include Simon Lindgren, Emily Bender, and Alex Hanna, and Karen Howe, and I will put links to some of their resources in the episode notes. So how do I understand AI? Well, in all of these myriads of ways and contexts. In relation to my main area of specialism, computer-assisted qualitative analysis, I think it's super important to remember that AI tools are not actually new. So for example, we've had supervised and unsupervised machine learning tools in this space for years. The current focus on generative AI tools must be understood, I believe, in that historical context. So again, if you come to one of my sessions, you're going to need to expect a little bit of a history lesson. The other thing to say is that terminology in this space isn't static. This is something I find particularly interesting and illuminating, actually, when I reflect on what's happening in the qualitative AI space. It seems to me that most qualitative researchers, when referring to AI nowadays, mean generative AI, and the generative AI that derives from large language models. But, as I mentioned, this is not the only form of AI that has impacted our space. And so we should really critically reflect on the difference in uptake and discussion about traditional forms of AI that have been around in our field since at least 1999, more than a quarter of a century ago, in comparison to the generative forms of AI that's occupying everybody's headspace right now. I have a load more to say on the Qual at scale discussion in this context, but not here and not now. Instead, what I want to do is finish off this part of my reflections by emphasising that, in my experience, a lot of qualitative researchers who are considering the use of generative AI tools in their projects do not have a detailed understanding of how large language models work. Many of them are surprised and enlightened when they find out, but this is fundamental, foundational knowledge to know in deciding whether and how it might or might not be appropriate to use the tools that harness these capabilities for qualitative analysis. And so it does really concern me that researchers are using these tools without such knowledge. How can anyone make an informed decision about whether, how, and when it might be appropriate and useful to use these tools, or indeed not, without such knowledge? And this is an aspect of the hype that we really need to address. And that brings me on to another neglected area in the space, which I like to call ethics are everywhere. Yes, everywhere. So the more I've learned about the ethics surrounding the development and use of generative AI, the more considered I've become in how I choose to use it or not. In my awareness-raising role, this is something that you won't find me skipping over. In my experience, qualitative researchers tend to think about data security and privacy when considering the ethics and of the use of generative AI for qualitative research. Very important, of course, and I'll talk about that a bit more later on. But the ethics involved are much, much broader than that, and as a community, we need to be discussing them a whole lot more than we are. As social researchers, how can we decide whether and how to use generative AI without taking into account the social and environmental implications? So, if you come to one of my sessions, you'll be considering a variety of broader ethical considerations, including, but not limited to, first of all, the data that large language models are trained on and how it was obtained and recompensed or not. Asking questions like, are the models you're using trained on data that was fairly acquired, and are they fit for the purposes that you intend to put them to? Secondly, the environmental implications of developing, running and using large language models, and the inequitable distribution across the globe in terms of the environmental consequences of their use. Do you think about that before you quickly ask ChatGPT? I think we should. The exploitation of humans involved in, for example, fine-tuning large language models, does this sit okay with you when you're sat at home in your nice, comfortable armchair, prompting a large language model to do a task that you could easily do yourself? We should find out about these things, we should think about these things, we should question these things. So the point is that the development and use of tools are not benign, and as a social researcher, we must ask ourselves whether the consequences of generative AI aligns with our values. This is an ongoing dialogue, and as the field continues to develop, there will be different ways to respond to the ethical implications. But this is a conversation that's not being had enough in the qualitative research field. Why? I'm not sure. But what I do know is that it is the data-related ethical concerns that occupy many qualitative researchers' minds. So that's what I'm going to turn to next. So, data security and privacy is a top concern, and so it should be. In my experience, this is what most qualitative researchers are most concerned about. And they are right to be concerned. Bespoke generative AI tools for qualitative research usually assure data security and privacy because such tools are largely developed by companies that have either been in this space for years, established CAQDAS packages is how I refer to them, or they're new companies focused on developing tools for aspects of the qualitative workflow, leaning mainly or entirely on generative AI capabilities. As an aside, by bespoke tools, that's what I mean, those that are designed specifically for qualitative research purposes. So currently, in addition to in-house tools developed by organisations for their own purposes, these bespoke tools fall into those two groups, the established CAQDAS package integrations and new online apps. So I generally do trust these companies with regards to the safeguards that they say they put in place re data security and privacy. Why? Because not only do I know most of them personally, and many of the established ones I've known for decades, but I also know that the implications of a data breach are pretty major for them, so I don't believe they would cut corners in this regard. However, when using CAQDAS packages, whether they're established or new, if we use those that themselves use third-party models, maybe often, in fact, developed by the big tech companies, then in addition we have to trust that the agreements that the CAQDAS developers have with those third-party companies will be upheld by those third-party companies. And this I am less inclined to be trusting of. Then we've got the issue of models. So different CAQDAS packages use different models. They also differ in how open they are about the models they use for which tasks, and also in whether they enable users, us, the researchers, the human researchers, to choose between models. So I urge anyone considering their use to investigate this thoroughly to ensure that the safeguards they have in place do actually meet your ethical needs. So I'm talking about IRB and so on. For these reasons, there are certain types of data that I wouldn't upload for generative AI processing, and I'll talk a little bit more below about what I will and won't do. I won't upload certain types of data unless I know exactly where the data is going for which particular task. Having said all of this, I do think things are changing and will continue to change with models, and I'll also say something more about that later. Also, though, we need to discuss what informed consent now means. Although most qualitative researchers I come across are most concerned about data privacy and security, there is less discussion about our responsibilities as researchers, to the participants who provide such data when we use generative AI to facilitate qualitative analysis. It's obvious that a bunch of people are uploading qualitative data gathered from humans without thinking about or asking those people for their consent to do so. For example, I've heard researchers say things along the lines of, it doesn't matter if I use ChatGPT or NVivo or highlighter pens, it's up to us as researchers how we do it, it's just a tool. Or, if I ask participants if they consent to me using AI to analyse their interviews, they'll say no, so I'm not going to do that because then I can't get my project done. Or, if we don't really understand how it works, how can we expect our participant to? So it's just better to do what we've always done, assure anonymity, that's enough. So these kinds of comments really concern me greatly, and I don't agree with them. What informed consent now means needs urgently to be discussed in the qualitative community, and I haven't seen much of that. But for those of you reading or listening to this who are horrified by such comments, don't just slam these researchers, engage with them. Understand where they're coming from, what underlies their positions, explain to them why it does matter. This isn't something that's being discussed much as far as I've seen, as I said, but in my sessions I always raise this question, encouraging researchers to put themselves in the shoes of their participants via a series of exercises, but as a community of practice we really do need to discuss this, and we need to discuss it urgently. So, what do I think about the capabilities of AI tools for Qual? I've written elsewhere about the broad genres of AI tools for Qual and the capabilities that derive from them in relation to the qualitative research process, and the specifics about what each tool does, how well it does it, for what purpose, and so on is the topic for a workshop or maybe a subsequent series of posts. We'll see. But here I want to make a few more high-level comments about the potential role of generative AI, focusing on either questions that researchers typically ask me often, right now, or topics which I believe are particularly important to discuss. So first of all, we didn't ask for this. What's the problem generative AI seeks to solve? When I ask students and researchers, which I often do, why they're thinking of using generative AI tools for their qualitative projects, I get a variety of responses, as I'm sure you can imagine. Amongst the top 5 are usually to save time, to do better analysis, and interestingly, to not be left behind. Each of these trouble me, but here I want to speak to the final one, the fear of missing out, or FOMO, as it's referred to often on social media. If you spent time on LinkedIn recently and follow any of the people that I do, you'll easily be sucked into the impression that there's a tide of AI occurring and that if you're not using it, you're being left on the shelf. Jumping on the bandwagon is understandable, I think, given the amount of hype we encounter. That everyone is using it is definitely an oft-heard sentiment, but is it really true? And if it is true, is this the reason to use it oneself? I think not. So, here a little bit more history. When groups of researchers and computer scientists first began developing software to manage qualitative materials and facilitate what's often called the messy process of analysis back in the 1980s, they did so to try and solve an identified problem. Until recently, this has been the case throughout the CAQDAS field. As each new product entered the space, its developers expressed the gap they were filling or an unmet need they were addressing. And then, in November 2022, suddenly, a new capability was thrust upon us, and qualitative researchers and developers alike began scrabbling around to work out how to use it. Although, as you will have realised by now, I'm pragmatic about the fact that this is the situation we find ourselves in, I'm not convinced this is the best way to develop tools or to foster methodological innovation. Tools are powerful. I love tools. But we mustn't use them in a methodological vacuum. This brings me on to talk about types of tools. So I mentioned earlier general purpose and bespoke tools. So, to use general purpose or bespoke tools, for me, there is no question. I get asked a lot, why would I bother to pay for a software program or a subscription when I can just use the free version of ChatGPT or some other equivalent general purpose tool? And for me, there are lots of reasons. Among the most important is that bespoke tools are just that, bespoke. The discerning developers have researched which AI models do a better job at certain tasks, and they have optimized their tools accordingly. Without getting into the detail here, another analogy that illustrates the point. Think of it as being a bit like a post office sorting room. Letters, parcels, postcards come into the office, and they're sorted according to type and destination by trained postal staff, and they're then sent out accordingly, perhaps on a train, in a van, or by foot, to get to where they need to go, within the time frame specified by the postage stamps that have been stuck upon them. The fragile parcels are given special treatment. The sorting job is what the CAQDAS developers are doing with our prompts to optimize their fulfillment for our analytic purposes and needs. None of that happens when using general purpose tools. There is no sorting office. There are a number of implications of this, but I'm just going to highlight two of the most important right now. First of all, the vastly reduced likelihood of hallucinations. Not the best word, I don't think, because it anthropomorphizes large language models, which I don't believe is helpful. But this is the established term. But anyway, there are reduced likelihoods of hallucinations when using bespoke tools. CAQDAS packages, whether they're established or new, are typically programmed not to give an answer if there is no relevant data. Secondly, usually bespoke tools provide direct links from summarized responses to the data that the responses are based on, fundamentally necessary for the tasks of qualitative analysis so that we can review, validate, reflect, and interpret. I don't think I've mentioned interpretation yet, actually. If you want to know more about my thoughts on whether large language models can do it, then check out the link in the episode notes. Spoiler, no, they can't. Anyway, I am generally impressed, actually, with how CAQDAS developers are integrating generative AI tools into their products, in particular those that give researchers choices about how the tools work or the models that are used. But I would like to see a lot more transparency concerning the methodological underpinnings as well as the technicalities of implementation. This is not the place to outline the specifics. Come to one of my workshops or check out the reviews on the CAQDAS networking project, which we are working hard to update and integrate info about AI into them at the moment. What I can say right now is that the way that different developers are harnessing generative AI, whether into those established CAQDAS packages or into new apps, really reveals a lot about their perceptions of qualitative methods and the needs of the community. I encourage them to discuss this more openly. Some of them are doing so, but I'd like to see a lot more of it. Because opening up the black box is one way that developers that do have the good of the field at their heart can set themselves apart from the charlatans. And there are many charlatans. So my advice is to be aware of the do qualitative analysis in minutes discourses. Despite what some may have you believe, it's not a click of a button task. It never has been, and it never will be. So I'm talking about methods, and so the next section is titled Methodological Matters, No One-Size-Fits-All Response. Whether generative AI is methodologically appropriate for qualitative analysis, I don't believe is a question that has a simple yes-no answer. For some purposes, it may well have a place and be incredibly useful. For others, it is wholly inappropriate. But the nuance behind making these decisions is often not sufficiently reflected in discussions. There's loads of black and white, it's great versus it's awful assertions, and I think they are truly unhelpful. There's so much more nuance involved. And as a community, I really believe that we need to do better We must discuss the developments and their implications openly and with respect for alternative views. This relates not only to the tools, but also to the perceptions of what qualitative research is and what qualitative data analysis entails. These are not homogeneous endeavours. They never have been. There's a methodological spectrum, and different ways of working with qualitative materials are appropriate all the way along it. I don't believe it's true that certain types of qualitative research or analysis are better than others. We need to drop those discourses. In particular, I'm not a fan of the generative AI doesn't align with qualitative principles mantra that I see in lots of places. It's true, not for certain types of qualitative work, but for others, it does. The purists have a valid point in the context of their type of work, but dogma about what real qualitative work is naive and patronising, and I wish that we weren't doing it. So let me move on to talk about what I think about the implications of the use of AI tools for Qual. There are many implications of all of this on our field, and we're yet to see, I think, how it's all going to play out and what the lasting impacts will be. Whatever your thoughts, we are no doubt in the midst of a fast-moving and disruptive era. Whilst disruption of the status quo can sometimes lead to innovation and in the long-term benefits, we do need to be careful how we engage with tools and with one another. Why? Because there is a deepening schism in the field. I've definitely observed this as a result of generative AI, because its potential implications are the most profound and divisive that we've seen since the first CAQDAS packages emerged. Advocates and skeptics each have strong views, and they both have valid points to make. In the middle are a large group of researchers and teachers of methods who are unsure about the capabilities and the implications of these developments. Such differing perspectives reflect what was seen when dedicated CAQDAS packages first emerged in the 1980s, but the divergence between the camps are both more obvious and more divisive now. When I opened the 2014 CAQDAS conference, I spoke about the ebb and flow of the convergence and divergence of the field over time. We're now firmly in an era of divergence. There are also differences in how qualitative researchers working in different sectors are responding to the use of generative AI tools for their qualitative work. Academics are typically most sceptical and resistant. Other sectors, such as industry, market research, government social research, appear to be embracing generative AI much more, although not exclusively. So it's going to be really interesting to see what happens in coming years. Perhaps we'll see the divergence between sectors increase as some adopt generative AI and others are more reluctant to do so. Either way, what I hope for is more open dialogue and less demonising. Is coding dead? I don't think so. Among one of the most powerful things the advocates say is that we no longer need to code qualitative materials to do qualitative analysis. The ability to engage in a dialogue or chat with qualitative text using a conversational interface is a different way of engaging with material, and for some, this is a game changer. Although I can see its value for some purposes, I don't believe we have seen or are near to seeing a paradigm shift in how qualitative researchers do qualitative analysis. Why? First, because it's not the case that most qualitative researchers are using these tools, either at all or instead of other tools. For a paradigm shift to take place requires more than simply a new capability that a few people are using or advocating. Secondly, using generative AI interfaces to chat with qualitative data is not a new analytic method in itself, just a different way of doing it. So, in the language of the 5-level QDA method, it's a new tactic, not a new strategy or methodology, which I believe would be required for a paradigm shift. Thirdly, just because it's possible doesn't mean other tactics, for example coding, are redundant. I agree that qualitative analysis can happen without coding. After all, this is not a new idea. We've long had qualitative methods that don't rely on coding. We can learn something from history here too. For example, when CAQDAS packages emerged, we didn't suddenly see everyone throw away their highlighter pens. In fact, there are still many researchers who do qualitative analysis using pen and paper methods. These are the tactics they choose to enact their analytic strategies. Using generative AI to chat with data via the conversational interface is a different tactic, yes, but I'm not convinced that it's a new analytic strategy, or that it is or will take over from the humble highlighter pen, the use of general purpose software like Word or Excel, or the advanced qualitative coding functionality in the established CAQDAS packages that many of us have been using for decades. And also for me, one reason is that I actually like coding. I like considering deeply what bits of data mean in the context of other bits of data. And although I can see how generative AI chatting can be useful in some circumstances, we do lose something by not gathering instances of concepts via the coding process. And I'm not yet ready to let go of that. That's not to say that I can't see a place for chatting with qualitative data, and in my sessions we look at this and its potential in a variety of different ways, and it definitely can be useful. But for me, its use is most powerful when used in combination with or integrated with coding or other tactics, not wholly instead of it. Maybe we'll see qualitative coding become less dominant as a tactic for enacting methods as time goes by. I don't know. But what I do know is that as far as my experience tells me, we are far from that right now. And likely, if the history of the past 40 years is anything to go by, we'll not see every qualitative researcher, or maybe even most qualitative researchers, do their analysis using generative AI tools. I'm open to being wrong about this, but that's how I see it right now. However, I do think that methods teachers need to step up to the plate. I want to finish up this part by talking about something that I think is of utmost importance right now, and that's the role of methods teachers. A lot of hype around generative AI suggests that it can save us a whole load of time, generate deeper insights than we mere humans can, and do a bunch of mundane tasks that we would rather not do ourselves. Hence, much of the narrative is around replacing. This is neither helpful nor true, in my opinion. But there's also a lot of concern about how the next generation of researchers will learn how to do analysis and whether students are cheating. I do have serious concerns about how some researchers are using tools and talking about qualitative analysis in the context of generative AI. This is what I've called qualitative deepfake. It's real, and it's a serious threat to our profession, the status of knowledge, and the robustness of societal decisions made on the back of qualitative research. And definitely, as a community, we do need to call this out. There are many self-proclaimed experts who've popped out of nowhere, sharing cheat sheets and proclaiming qualitative analysis can be done in minutes. Not so. And so I believe the teachers of qualitative methods have a really important role to play right now. I believe they must integrate discussions of generative AI into their curricula. To neglect to do so, to neglect to teach current and future students about generative AI-assisted qualitative data analysis, I believe is irresponsible. I hear many personal misgivings about the role of generative AI and qualitative analysis from methods teachers, and suggestions that there's a lack of time in the curriculum, not just for teaching about generative AI, but qualitative software tools more generally. These, I believe, are not good reasons to neglect such teaching, and I do wonder if these are just excuses based on personal opinions rather than oriented around the good of the students. It doesn't have to be a choice between teaching methods or tools, even if there's limited time in the curriculum. It is possible to teach methods and tools together, and even to teach methods via the use of tools. whether we like CAQDAS packages or AI tools or not, and whether we use those tools ourselves or not. As teachers of methods, I believe we do a major disservice to our students by not teaching them about these tools and about how to think about and use them appropriately. In the AI era, this is way more important than it's ever been before because, like it or not, people are using AI. If we don't teach students how to do so appropriately, how can we expect them to use it with integrity or to make an informed choice not to use it? We've got to get our heads out of the sand about this. I know from personal experience that it is possible within limited timeframes. And if you're a teacher and you don't know how to do it, be in touch and I'd be happy to help, to discuss it and to give you resources to do it. Alright, so let's finish up. How I will and won't use AI tools. As a result of all of the above, I'm selective in how I use generative AI tools, and I encourage others to consider their implications and use very, very carefully. Here's one more little analogy for you. We make many choices every day that affect our individual environmental impact on the world, like how diligent we are about recycling, whether we grab another plastic water bottle from the shop shelf when we've forgotten our reusable one, or whether we reduce the amount of red meat we eat on a weekly basis. So too, our everyday decisions about whether and how to use generative AI and for which tasks are individual, in-the-moment moral judgments. My primary use of generative AI up to now has been to explore what it does in order to inform and fulfill my awareness raising and capacity building remit. This has involved a range of experimentations with a wide variety of tools, using a range and amounts of different types of data, considering how generative AI tools can facilitate the enactment of different qualitative methods. In addition to these experiments, it's included using it for some of my own research, but that's for another day. So here are some headlines, just to finish up. I would only use generative AI for qualitative analysis via bespoke CAQDAS tools, either established or new, and I will not upload research data to general purpose chatbots. Why? Because they're not designed for qualitative data analysis purposes, and therefore they're not the best choice for such tasks. Also, I am not trusting of the big tech companies. Although I do believe that the CAQDAS developers have in place what they believe to be robust agreements with the model platforms, I'm not sure I believe that all of those third-party businesses will respect those agreements. I would therefore think very carefully before using even these generative AI tools with certain types of participant data. And the type of data you're using is a really important thing to consider. I therefore like the ability to choose which models to use, and I look forward to a future which sees more such choices and also more models that are developed fairly and are more fit for purpose for qualitative analysis than the big tech companies' models are. I will not use generative AI to create images, music, or other creative artifacts for any purpose. Why? Because they're generated from training data that was highly likely to have been stolen without recompense. And in addition, they look rubbish. I do not like looking at AI-generated images. I do not like listening to AI bots delivering podcasts. I do not like listening to AI-generated music. I really don't understand the point. So you're not going to get any of that from me. And I'm not interested in any of that from you. However, I am prepared to use general purpose large language models for some tasks, and when I do, I am willing to have my prompts become part of the ongoing training dataset. Why? Because if I'm going to teach how to use them appropriately and use them myself for some tasks, I necessarily want better models in the future, and therefore I should be open to contributing to making them better. I will not use chatbots to search the internet for routine questions or tasks that a simple Google search or similar can do. Why? Because asking ChatGPT or equivalent a question costs more energy than a Google search. And because it's not designed for the task. Use the tools that are designed for the tasks. It's not rocket science. I will continue to familiarise with the developing capabilities of large language models and tools harnessing generative AI capabilities for qualitative research purposes. And why I will do that is so that I can continue raising awareness about their capabilities and about their consequences, whatever they might be, in all their guises, to facilitate researchers to make informed choices about their own use. This means that I will use them, but I minimise the use. Specifically, I minimise the regenerations of tasks that I've already done in previous teaching encounters. I don't recreate what I've already done unless I have to for teaching purposes. So I have a bank of already created examples that I show, rather than redoing each task, each time I teach. And I would not use generative AI for qualitative analysis without the explicit, fully informed consent from participants. And I would only use generative AI for commissioned research where the commissioning body requested it. Alright, so if you've made it this far, then you probably can hang on for a couple more minutes. The last section is titled The Evolving Relationship Between Methods and Tools. We have agency, let's use it. So, most of you know that I've spent my career thinking about the relationship between qualitative methods and tools. How are qualitative methods enacted through the use of tools? How do tools influence the development of qualitative methods? Where does the balance lie between the two in different contexts? These are amongst the questions that have occupied my mind for 30 odd years now. And now, in this era of generative AI that's been thrust upon us, this continues for me more urgently than perhaps ever before. So not only will I continue to raise awareness and encourage critical reflection about the use of tools, I will urge the community at large to engage in the debate, because it does matter. If it matters to you, then whatever your position in the debate, you can have a role at shaping what happens from this point on. Share your concerns, discuss the possibilities, shape how CAQDAS developers harness capabilities. Don't just bemoan it. That said, I won't push the use of generative AI over and above any other tool. I meet researchers where they are in their process, thinking about tool adoption, and I take pride and a great amount of enjoyment actually in discussing the issues to facilitate them to make informed decisions that work for them, not that are based on my personal opinions. Although I'm spending a lot of time discussing and teaching about generative AI in qualitative spaces, I continue to do a lot of work with researchers who are using other tools, because other tools still have a place, and often they are more appropriate. And so I'd like to just share with you that I often myself take a digital detox completely, and I get down with data using my highlighter pens and scissors in the garden to connect with them in different ways. You definitely engage with data differently depending on the medium that you're using. If you want to work with me to discuss any tools for qualitative analysis, subscribe to my Linktree to be alerted when new sessions are scheduled. And if you want to hear more about what I do in my garden when the tech isn't in the room, check out a workshop that I'm designing with Anuja Cabral and Daniel Turner that's happening later this year, November, in Edinburgh. And come along to have some of what we like to call qualitative fun. Thank you for listening, and I really look forward to hearing your comments, feedback, thoughts, so that we can shape this space moving forward together.